Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the servant strengthening quests that are going to be coming up with NA's 7th anniversary this year. Now, usually what I had done in the past is I had actually made a video talking about all the strengthenings and interludes for a year, but kind of as of this year on forward, JP had been in a little bit of a lull where they really weren't doing a whole lot. In fact, JP just got its first interlude campaign in 2 years, pretty much. So that kind of tells you exactly how few they had been running. We do still always get the strengthenings at anniversary, though, so I did feel like it was a good idea to go ahead and make a video about these, since usually these can actually be some pretty game-changing ones and actually really hype. Now, I will say the batch that we're going to get for the 7th anniversary is not necessarily the best batch we've ever gotten. In that regard, I do feel like they maybe could have done some things a little bit better. Part of this is just due to the fact that they're still only running 2 strengthenings a day over the 7-day period. So I do feel like if, for instance, they had actually come back and said, hey, you know what, let's go ahead and do basically 3 strengthenings a day. As someone in chat had already pointed out, we could have done a 3-star, a 4-star, and a 5-star upgrade for every single day. And that would have actually been pretty hype. They could have actually really talked that up and made a big deal out of it. But they've kind of just been sticking with the same old, where they're only doing 2 strengthenings for each single day. And this is something of a point of contention that I at least believe that since the roster is ever expanding, that they are kind of starting to need to do more strengthenings overall just to kind of help keep pace with that. I do understand that that will also contribute to things like power creep a little bit more, but we already have pretty insane power creep with certain units just kind of really rocketing ahead of the rest of the pack. So I think it's actually a good idea if they start to kind of bring up the rear a little bit more and get some relatively not paid attention to units some of the actual limelight and give them, some much needed upgrades. But again, they haven't done that, so there's no point in actually really spending a lot of time on it. But we are going to go through each one of these upgrades here, and I'm going to tell you exactly kind of how I feel about them, especially nowadays on JP, since we are 2 years in advance of these upgrades actually happening. And again, just a reminder, NA's anniversary should be coming out probably around July 7th. We're going to have the panel at Anime Expo on the 6th. We already know that for a fact. Again, I'll probably be covering it, assuming it is televised for that day. And we should have the actual anniversary celebration and everything going live on the 7th. So definitely make sure you guys are prepared for that. It is going to be coming soon. You've got a couple more weeks still, though, to go, and there's a lot you could be doing in the meantime, like getting your story caught up or, again, working on leveling up your servants so you get some of those juicy milestone rewards when we actually get to the anniversary. But let's go ahead and start out with the first day here, and you guys can see. So like I said, just pretty much assume that this is going to be like July 7th for us instead of August 1st like it was for JP. But basically, we start out with an upgrade to Vlad and Jekyll and Hyde. Now for Vlad, it's going to be the upgrade to his 2nd skill here. As you guys can see, it's just an upgrade from his normal military tactics. This has actually been one of those skills that they've been kind of across the board, across all units, kind of tweaking. And this is because basic tactics just has some weird scaling where it's only going up to like a non-round number. So they actually end up coming back and using this to give Vlad extra a little bit more beefiness, a little bit more punch. As now he's going to upgrade the party's NP damage for 3 turns instead of just the 1. He's going to also increase the party's buster performance for 3 turns, giving another reason to level this skill up, both of which have now kind of changed their scaling as well to 20% instead of that 18% that you were seeing before. And then now he's also going to grant himself a debuff on defense buff for 5 attacks for 3 turns, which is basically that he will inflict defense down by 10% when an enemy hits him. So definitely a nice thing since Vlad does have a taunt in his kit and is somewhat of a tanky unit. You can use this to your advantage to set up either his NP or someone else's, especially in a scenario where you know the enemy is going to be able to respond and get some hits off, like in a challenge environment. So again, I do think this is a nice upgrade for him. It's maybe not the best upgrade for him. It's maybe not the most meta upgrade, but it is just a nice, easy upgrade. They gave him some additional firepower. And again, Vlad's someone that's already been good in those tanky sort of roles, or as somebody that is just anti-evil. So I do think it is an overall good buff for him to have. Then next up, we actually end up with the buff to Jekyll's third skill, and this one used to be his self-modification. Now, remember the way that Jekyll actually works. So basically, Jekyll is going to transform into Hyde, and as a result, he's going to start out as an assassin, then get to his NP, use his NP, and transform into a berserker. The problem with this is his skills basically just work better pretty much across the board as the berserker form. So in a weird way, Jekyll and Hyde have always needed a lot of love, a lot of work, because they have just been a very lackluster servant overall. To me, they're actually one of the servants in the worst possible position in FGO, because they're somewhat neutered by the fact that, again, they just don't really actually have an NP in their berserker form. That is to say, they can't actually even use it. They get no benefit. So to me, there's a lot of love that they need to sort of throw that way. But what they tried to do is they tried to come here and they tried to take the self-modification buff and actually change it into self-alteration, where now it will basically do the same things that it did before, but also just give 80% charge. The sort of weird aspect to this is it is on a low cooldown. It is entirely likely that you could get back to this, but it does nothing as Hyde. So again, the problem at play here is that you're just not going to have any sort of use for this skill in the actual berserker form. This is just meant to get you to the berserker form and allow you to get to that NP right away. You could obviously combine this with a mana loading skill that had been maxed out, but again, I don't really recommend using a lore on Jekyll, not until they actually do fix the overall functionality of this unit. Again, Jekyll and Hyde are not unusable. It's just one of those deals where basically they're kind of gimped a little bit. So if you are using them, you could be using a better option in most circumstances. And so the other downside to this is while it has no benefit in Hyde's form, the other weird issue is, again, that you kind of want to save a lot of these skills to be used in Hyde's form, because you can see he basically gains 15% crit damage already to begin with, but then if used as Hyde, gains an additional 35%. So it is much better to use a lot of Jekyll and Hyde skills as the actual berserker form, and this upgrade is incentivizing you to utilize it in the actual assassin form instead. So there is a sort of weird kind of, I'm not going to say tone deaf, but just sort of like odd application of this upgrade. I am going to say it kind of helps, as now you maybe don't need external help in some way, shape, or form to get him to the actual NP and get him into the berserker form. But again, I think, you know, for such a cool and interesting character, this is just a really, really kind of shame that they are in the state that they are in. It is, I'm going to say, at least still going to help you get to it, but you know, to be honest, there was no difference between doing something like that or just slapping a K-scope on the guy and just kind of calling it a day. So it is an upgrade. It does kind of help, but it's somewhat ham-fisted and basically can result in you just not utilizing your skills as efficiently as possible on him. So it is what it is. I'm going to say this upgrade is a start, but it's not really going to solve the issues that Jekyll and Hyde have. Now for day 2 here, you guys can see we get a Medusa Lancer and a Diarmuid buff. Basically, each one of them is, I'm going to say, in an interesting spot. So again, for Medusa right here, you guys can see she basically is going to get the upgrade to her guts, which is going to be, again, her third skill. And the way this one originally worked is it already gave the invuln anyways and the guts of 1 time 3 turns. But now, as a result, it basically is also going to charge her NP. This is an interesting addition for a unit that I'm going to say has received some love and is a decent option overall. Medusa Lancer being single target quick has always had this really interesting sort of aspect to her, given the fact that, again, she had monstrous strength, but she also had the ability to charm, and basically they ended up upgrading this to actually give a steroid in its own, and also increasing the charm rate to 100%, meaning that, again, if there's no magic resistance at play, this is going to land. So definitely a really, really nice kit overall. But given the fact that she also has the chance to stun with her NP, is one of the reasons that a lot of people would use Medusa Lancer, is low key to like charm and stun lock enemies over and over and over again, so they can't actually get anything off and actually just kind of manage to lock them down. This is a big reason why they put so much like mental debuff immunity on a lot of units, is to prevent things like charm locking from the Gorgon sisters. So it's really funny that they sort of facilitate it and incentivize it by basically now with this third skill giving her an upgrade to give her even more charge. This is just going to make her more loopable and increase the odds of her actually refunding enough and basically being able to charge back to full and do it again. So again, this is a nice upgrade for her. This will also sort of allow her to be used in a little bit more of different comp scenarios. You can start her out with a 50% C, give her, obviously a maxed out mana loading or some overflow charge, and allow her to actually get to her NP relatively quickly and easily with a good craft essence under her, rather than having to start out with something like a K-scope or something like that. So it is a nice upgrade overall, and I do think it's a rather good one. Then we also end up having Diarmuid here, and Diarmuid basically gets the buff to his third skill. And as you guys can see, this one is one of those ones where Diarmuid really had nothing going for him. Diarmuid was one of those units that there was not really a good reason to take him to a lot of fights. He's just sort of a unit that you can bond up and kind of work on, interludes and stuff like that just for some additional milestone credit. But honestly, I'm not going to say he's the worst unit in the world, but he's just very plain. So they took his 3 stars of critical generation rate up, and they basically increased this to add actual steroids to his kit, something that he didn't really have before. They're not really going to be a good steroid in that regard. It's only 20%, but it's 20% out of nowhere, and this is going to at least help. It's going to buff up some of those lackluster NP damage numbers, and it is going to at least give him a little bit better card performance as well, since it's both quick and arts, kind of giving him 4 of his cards of his deck actually being useful here. And part of this is made possible by the fact that Diarmuid actually doesn't have the standard Lancer deck. He does have the double arts cards instead of double Buster like most other Lancers do. So again, this is a nice thing, and it also ends up adding a little bit of crit damage here, up to 30% on top of that. And all of it is for 3 turns. You do have a little bit more functionality, a little bit more capability, and I am going to say that this is definitely a start helping Diarmuid out. I would like to see Diarmuid get something, maybe in the way of charge in particular, but again, at the end of the day, I'm going to say this at least helps him be overall a little bit more useful, even as something more, or even as nothing more than just say a NP battery, or sorry, not battery, but like NP stick to actually go and beat people with. So in that regard, he can definitely be an option for you, especially on a budget, but yeah, this isn't going to be the best upgrade for him either. It's just an okay upgrade, and he definitely needed something to actually pull him out of the doldrums in that regard. Next up, we have day 3, and day 3 is actually probably, in my opinion, going to be the hypest day for these upgrades, and we'll kind of talk about why here in a second. But again, you guys can see it's going to be an upgrade to Void Shiki as well as Fergus. Just popping both of them open right now, you guys can see. The upgrade is going to be to Void Shiki's third skill, and this one is a really, really nice one because Void Shiki had always been the analog to Assassin Shiki. And while Assassin Shiki had the ability to charge at the expense of her health, Void Shiki had the ability to heal at the expense of her charge. So again, it was that yin and yang relationship. I'm going to say Void Shiki kind of got the worst deal in that regard because I'd rather have charge than not, but interestingly enough, I've seen a lot of people talk a lot of crap about this skill, but this skill is exactly the same as Squirtoria's skill that allows her to heal. And that skill is very good. I think the big difference is Squirtoria is a much better refunding unit, so there's usually a lot of charge lying around for you to use that heal on Squirtoria, because again, you have the demerit of it draining your gauge by 10%. So that was definitely a downside to the skill, but I am going to say again, having a 5,000 heal on a 4-turn cooldown can be invaluable at just keeping you alive. So they actually end up revisiting this and they say, okay, you know what? Yeah, you're right. It did kind of suck. So even though we had the yin-yang relationship before, now we just totally stood it on its head because we also gave her charge. So now she's going to get 30% NP gauge. She's going to have the ability to recover one ally's HP as well, because now it becomes a functionally targetable skill in that sense. So definitely a little bit more of a weirder aspect to it. She's still going to have basically the ability to drain, but now it's reduce one ally's gauge, not her. So you can target somebody else in the party, heal them, drain their gauge, and she's going to get charged. You could also target herself, and it will charge and then drain, which would suck, but still, this is a really, really nice thing, and it does, to me, actually open up a lot of options, because again, we do have basically this being strengthened too, but we've got another upgrade coming down the line that's really going to help her out and give her 3 turns basically of her arts up. And it's at that point that she actually blossoms into, even though she has just a single hit arts NP with death proc on it, she actually turns into a Black Grail Looper, which is kind of nuts. So again, Void Shiki really getting the first taste of that right here by having an actual 30% charge added. I can't stress to you guys enough how important this is for her, as because for no other reason other than that, just getting 30% charge when you had none is going to be a really big deal. And do keep in mind, she does have the charge after her NP as well, so it's really, really a good thing for her. She is going to have this. She's going to have that capability of starting, unassisted basically with a maxed out mana loading and a 50% CE from that 50% starting point. And that is going to be really good, as it's going to allow her to use a better option for craft essences at minimum in that sort of scenario. So again, even with the upgrades coming further on down the line, there's also going to be that possibility of Black Grail looping. But hey, this is going to be a really, really stellar buff for Void Shiki. And then next up here, we've got Fergus. This is going to be the upgrade to his second skill here. Again, you guys can see originally this skill was pretty lackluster. It was just an increase to his own defense for 3 turns. It also was going to, basically have the demerit of reducing one of his offensive buff success rate by 50% for 3 turns. So not that good in that regard, because again, while he does get the defense up, he's got the trade-off of, yeah, but then if you tried to pop, say, for instance, his first skill here, he's going to end up potentially losing out on this. So you have to be careful about the order in which you activate Fergus's skills. But they end up upgrading it. They totally get rid of the demerit. It's gone. You no longer have to worry about that with this. They also just straight up give him 3 turns of Buster Performance up of 20%. Again, not the craziest of steroids, but it's multi-turn duration, 20%. And he didn't even have it at all before, so it is a definite good damage upgrade for him. Now, the biggest issue that Fergus has had for a while, though, is that Fergus does not have any charge. He is the only AoE Saber that doesn't have charge in some capacity. So in that regard, he basically is the only AoE Saber who can't loop. Now, interestingly enough, now that Summer Kuro's in the game, that's technically not true and you could loop him, but I'm going to say in a conventional composition, you cannot 3-turn Fergus, and he's the only AoE Saber like that. But still, it's not necessarily the biggest of deals, as you can just use Fergus to basically take out a wave for you, and now he's also going to increase the critical damage of his Buster cards for 3 turns by 50% as well, just on top of the defense. So the skill just wholly turns around. It goes from kind of being a good defensive skill that also has a downside to now it is just all around good. And in that regard, it has got a lot going for it, and it's going to make Fergus just a better unit, especially as a low star. So again, I'm okay with this buff. I think this one's a good one for him. He certainly could use some sort of charge or some sort of capacity to help him get to an NP. But at the end of the day, I'm going to say at least this one came, and it is a decent upgrade for him. So next up here, we've got day 4. Now, day 4 is going to be an upgrade to Ushi's actual NP and Bartholomew Roberts' skill. So starting out right here, and again, I'm going to say Ushi Assassin has been an interesting unit. She's a unit that I think even when she came out, people assumed that she just did not really do good damage. And they're not wrong in that regard. Because to me, what the real focus for Ushi was the fact that she had 40% charge, and she also generated stars like crazy. A lot of people referred to as sort of 4-star Jack the Ripper, because the amount of stars that she actually did generate as an assassin, as a quick-based AoE assassin, was very good. She, even though she was a 4-star, could rival that sort of star generation. And again, you can see she's got 25.3% rate, so she is no slouch, combined with 4-hit quick cards. And basically, again, writing a plus to further enhance that, plus presence concealment. So again, a lot of stuff going for that star generation. But we basically end up taking her NP, which dealt damage to all enemies and then removed their offensive buffs and reduced their quick resistance for 3 turns. And we end up getting an upgrade. Now, remember the way that NP interludes usually work. Basically, whenever we're going to get one, NP2 becomes the new NP1, and NP5 becomes the new NP2. So essentially, the 800 and 1000 should be your scaling here, and lo and behold, that is exactly what it is. So in that regard, it's definitely nice just for that alone. You just get a nice damage upgrade. But as you can see, we're also adding a super effective niche against lawful alignment foes. So definitely nice, because there are certainly a ton of lawful alignment servants in the game. So in that regard, the Riders are going to be the better option for you, and you're actually going to have a much better go of things in that regard. As you can see, there's quite a bit of options for you. And again, I am going to say that at the end of the day, it's just going to be a good upgrade for her damage. It's something that I think you're really going to like, because it's just going to be super effective, and super effective scales really well. So again, there are some decent options here, not necessarily a huge amount, but I am going to say it is going to be a good upgrade for Ushi, just for the actual damage increase it's going to give her. Again, she's not the most loopable unit, but she does have 40% charge. The biggest issue that she has against her is going to be the fact that she's quick, but again, you can make it work as long as you've got 3 enemy waves. It's going to be, again, the considerations of what do you do against 2 enemy waves in that regard. But it is what it is. So next up, we've got Bartholomew Roberts here. And again, as you guys can see, this is going to be the upgrade basically to his second skill. He starts out with it basically reducing critical star absorption by 100 for 3 turns, and the party's critical damage for 3 turns by 40%. Now, at the end of the day, Bartholomew, to me, has always been somebody that has been a very budgetary unit. He's not been the best in terms of raw power. To me, he's more the low-star killer, because again, if you look at his MP, you can see he actually deals extra damage, and it is super effective to bronze rarity enemies. They do not have to be a servant, they just have to be basically the equivalent of a 1 or a 2-star, aka an actual bronze icon, and that's really why you use him. So he's never really been the most robust in terms of his damage, but what they kind of revisit here is instead, let's give him some party utility. So you can see he starts out with critical star absorption and party critical damage for 3 turns, basically with the critical damage being the only thing that scales. And they actually go ahead and they up it to 50% instead of the original 40. From there, they're also going to end up adding 10% party charge. Now, to me, this is an okay buff. I have to temper expectations for the fact that he is a 1-star. He's not supposed to have the most cracked kit imaginable. But I will say, in all honesty, I don't really see this actually improving his overall usefulness. I don't think anyone's really going to suddenly start taking him to the comp just because of this. But it is something where you might be able to say, hey, maybe I have Bartholomew take out an early wave, and then maybe he's also able to provide someone some sort of like missing 10% charge that they would somehow otherwise need. In that regard, this can be really nice for him to have. But otherwise, I just really don't see this being that big of a game changer or that big of a deal for him. It is an upgrade, certainly, but not the craziest of upgrades. I probably would have liked to have seen something that actually did increase his damage some, but it is what it is. So I'm going to say at the end of the day, you kind of know what you're already getting with Bartholomew. This one doesn't really change too much about him. Okay. So then next up here for our next day, day 5, we've got Murasaki Rider as well as basically Rice Man. So again, Tawara Toda and Murasaki are certainly an interesting units. I'm going to save Murasaki for second here on this one. And let's go ahead and talk about Tawara. Because Tawara's going to get the buff to his actual HP skill here, his third skill. And it's actually a really, really nice one. It's very similar to Bartholomew Roberts in that regard. So you can see, originally this skill just increased max HP for 3 turns. The way to think about max HP is this: it's just sort of a catch-all type of heal. It will heal you, but even if you're already at cap, it will just extend your cap. So it's a perfectly efficient heal. It will never have anything be wasted. The only thing you got to watch out for is things like buff block in that regard. But again, the real reason you're going to use Toda more than anything is the fact that he is anti-demonic, and that does make him actually a really good budget demon killer. He is really awesome for a lot of farming purposes because there are a ton of demonic enemies across a lot of the nodes. And so you can see here they end up actually giving him an upgrade to sort of expand his usefulness. So now he's basically going to increase the party's buster performance by 3 turns by 20% and increase the party's gauge by 10%. So you've got that same consideration that Bartholomew had where maybe now he can be used to set someone else up. But also, unlike Bartholomew, he actually just provides a party-wide buster buff. So this helps not only his own damage, and is an actual thing that's going to move the needle in his case, but it's also going to help him set up someone else and have them take out waves. So to me, this is a much better buff than Bartholomew got, because this one is, again, going to be a lot more applicable for the reasons that you're going to be using him, which is farming. Whereas Bartholomew had a little bit more going on with the crit side of things, and to me, I really don't want to have to be carding and critting with a 1-star in the party. It's certainly something I could do, especially if I'm more challenge-oriented, but it's probably not something I want to have to do. So again, in this regard, I do feel like this one works out a lot better for Toda, and it is a very nice upgrade for him. It's just going to expand his overall farming capability and the amount of comps that he can actually fit into. And then next up here, we got Murasaki Rider. Now, Murasaki Rider has been an interesting unit for me because I have, for a while, kind of stumped for her in the sense that she doesn't really, on paper, look like she would be the best unit. She is a single target arts rider, but one of the reasons I really like her is because even though she is debuff oriented, which is something I normally don't like, she basically has everything in her kit to actually pull it off, everything to actually make it work. So she has the ability to seal an enemy's NP and reduce their defense for 3 turns. Well, the defense down for 3 turns is really nice, especially because it's a whopping 30%. But the second skill is going to have a 500% chance to reduce one enemy's debuff resistance for 1 turn, so you're more likely to land all of her debuffs. So this is the skill you're going to want to use first. It's also going to seal their skills, locking them down, and reduce their arts resistance, which is going to increase your damage and your refund against the enemy. And then the third skill here just is a nice charge per turn that sort of helps automate the looping process for her. So now we can actually go and we can look at her NP. And we can see that it's only a 3-hit NP. But this is a 3-hit single target NP. So while it doesn't seem that it's that many, it's arts and it can still do a decent chunk. Also pay attention to the fact that she does have a 0.53 NP gain rate and basically 4-hit arts cards. So a lot of how Murasaki can work, and again, even 4-hit quick cards here, is you're going to get one of these cards usually to allow you to kind of get back to full and kind of keep the loop going. And even in the turn where you don't get cards, usually you can augment with supplemental charge. So it does make her a fairly reliable looper and somebody that just works out really well down the stretch in challenge fights. She has a ton of cards for getting back to an NP, and she has charge per turn and critical star bomb on this third skill. That's really going to help facilitate, again, automating that loop and, again, getting crits to help it out even more. So it's really, really nice in that regard, and I've always felt like she's a solid unit just for that alone. But then we actually get to the NP itself, and you can see it deals damage to one enemy and has a 60% chance to reduce their gauge by 1. It's also going to reduce arts resistance for 3 turns by 20%. So again, it's going to further set up that ability to do more damage, that ability to do more refund. This doesn't apply before damage goes out, unfortunately, but it will make it so that subsequent loops against the same enemy will hit harder and harder and will refund better and better. And then we get the NP upgrade, and all it's really going to do is just add damage across the board. As you can see, we get the standard NP interlude for her, and we're also going to get a super effective Earth attribute added in. This is going to make her quite the boss killer in that regard. She's going to be a really, really nice unit headed forward. And to me, that was probably the only thing that Murasaki actually did need, was some damage to help keep up with maybe some of those really nice 5-star riders that are out there. So given the fact that she was already very good in a challenge fight, very good at looping, adding in more damage, and then adding in a super effective niche, yeah, Murasaki Rider just got leaps and bounds better. So this is absolutely a stellar buff for her. Okay. Then we end up on day 6, and you guys can now see that we're going to get a buff to Voyager and Mr. Googly Eyes here, aka Caster Jill DeRay. Now again, Jill DeRay is also going to receive an NP interlude, which is definitely an interesting one. We're going to go ahead and start out with Voyager here. Basically, the upgrade is going to be to Voyager's third skill, and it's going to address a lot of the issues that we kind of had with Voyager. Voyager has always been this 50% charging unit that basically had the ability, sort of like Da Vinci Rider, of charging the party's NP gauge on the back end of things. You can see he's already had that NP interlude as of this point on JP, so definitely a nice thing, but that's still coming in the future beyond this upgrade. But certainly this is part of the pieces to the puzzle, because what it does is it helps alleviate some of the concerns with Voyager's overall kit. You can see he has the ability to increase his own quick performance for 3 turns, but then also reduce one enemy's quick resistance for 3 turns. The upside is the quick up of 3 turns comes with you and is carried through the waves of a node. The downside is the 20% is applied only to again, that wave and won't be carried with you. So this skill is kind of a mixed bag. Again, this is one of the reasons that I don't like debuffs, is that capability to carry it with you to a new set of enemies. And in that regard, it's something that we could have talked about with Murasaki there a little bit, is the fact that, again, the debuff is not going to apply to a different enemy if you're going through like a 1-1-1 type of wave in her case. In this case, though, we probably want to use Voyager in either challenge fights that are, servant gauntlets of AoE type setups, or again, some sort of farming application where Voyager can either take all the waves himself or take maybe 1 or 2 of the waves and charge the rest of the party as well. We end up getting the upgrade to the third skill, and you guys can see it started out with critical star absorption, party critical damage, and critical attack chance resistance. He was the first unit in the game to properly get critical attack chance resistance. And then basically we end up adding in just some additional quick up of 30%. Why? Because again, this is meant to help out the 20% that he would already have and carry with him in between the waves. Certainly you get 20% down on the turn that you activate this, but because it's a 3-turn duration, you're kind of incentivized to pop this on turn 1, which does mean that you wouldn't be having this quick down on wave 3. So getting an additional 3 turns of quick up is just going to make him functionally be a 50% quick up unit at that point, and potentially 70% at least for that first turn. So it's definitely a nice upgrade. It's a much needed upgrade because it's not only going to impact damage performance, it's also going to help his overall loop ability. And in that regard, I think this is a good buff for Voyager. It didn't solve all of his issues, but this did help out in the face of someone like Jack de Molay kind of competing with him as another AoE quick foreigner. So again, I do think this one really helped out, but really where the tide is going to turn for Voyager is with the next strengthening where he actually gets his NP interlude. As you can see, it just adds yet another super effective niche and increases damage. So across the board, that is always going to be a strong one for him. Now, as we mentioned, Gilles de Rais actually got his NP interlude. It just started out basically as an AoE buster NP, dealt damage to all 3 enemies, and then reduced their attack for 3 turns. I can't emphasize this enough that Gilles de Rais' NP was kind of crap. It just did not deal a lot of damage, even amongst AoE casters or casters just in general. He is considered to have one of the lowest NP damages in the game in that regard. So it's definitely something that needed some sort of love. And the reason I say this is, again, because of both the way that he is portrayed in actual anime, as well as, again, just overall the fact that he is this sort of rare story-locked unit. So to me, I feel like if you actually do manage to collect the copies of Gilles de Rais, the NP should perform a little bit better, no? But again, what ends up happening is we actually get the upgrade to the NP, and it's going to deal damage to all enemies, and then it's going to get a really weird twist here. It's going to charge the NP gauge of foreigner allies by 30%. Certainly very odd to have this, but does have some niche applications. You could potentially use this with Gilles de Rais, taking out a wave and then buffing somebody else up. But it's going to sort of require a wave that Gilles de Rais can actually kill, which when you don't have great NP damage, is going to restrict things quite a bit. So there are some scenarios where this could apply, but it's going to require the proper node structure, and it would then require you to want to use your foreigner ally alongside Gilles de Rais. I'm not going to say you couldn't do it, but it would be a nice thing if you could manage to take advantage of it. Really, to me, the big deal is going to be the fact that this is just increasing his somewhat low NP damage overall. And then it's also going to further reduce defense for 3 turns against enemies by 20% here. Definitely something that'll help out if you have to NP multiple times against the same unit. So I don't think this one's really that big of a game changer for Jill. I think they were just looking for a way to differentiate him and have him, have some other type of composition that he could be taken in. And I guess it does give that, but it's so niche that I'm not sure it's really going to be that impactful for him. So again, it's sort of an odd upgrade, but it at least addressed the overall damage issue that he really does suffer from. Still, though, to me, he kind of still suffers from that issue, so I hope to see him get additional upgrades down the line to further address this, but he's already on his 3rd strengthening, so it kind of is what it is at this point for my man. But still, it is what it is, and now we can go to the 7th and last day. So here we are actually going to get an interesting set of upgrades. As you guys can see, we're getting both NP upgrades for Lancelot Saber and Paul Bunyan. Now, Lancelot Saber has always been a crit carding maniac. He is basically a buzzsaw. He does not stop. He just keeps going. The only downside that Lancelot has ever had is the fact that he just is sort of squishy and doesn't have any sort of survivability anywhere in his kit. And that will not be addressed by this NP interlude. But we could definitely say that another issue that he maybe faced was the fact that he didn't have the best NP damage. That while his card performance was actually pretty good, he ends up kind of suffering the second you start doing like sort of dick measuring against a lot of the other single target sabers. So I think in the face of a lot of the other single target sabers, particularly the welfares, out damaging him, the devs finally decided, you know what, it's okay, we can actually give him an NP interlude finally. Again, you guys can see he started out with an increase to his own arts performance by 30% for 1 turn. This not only impacted his actual NP itself, but also any additional arts cards you would use after his NP. So definitely a nice thing that he always had in this, as it's one of the reasons that he could just sit there, get sort of like a couple of arts crits and just be right back to full right off the back end of his NP. He deals damage to that one enemy and then increases their damage taken for 5 turns by a flat 1000 damage. Not the best, but again, better to have it than not. So then he ends up getting the NP interlude here, and he basically still has the same effect, but now he deals damage that ignores defense buffs to one enemy. So not only does he get a damage increase, it now also defense pierces. So this gives him a little bit of standoutedness. It allows him to sort of shine in the face of maybe a lot of other competition, particularly for single target, particularly for arts. So it is going to allow him to kind of have that reason to be taken. And now he's also going to increase their damage taken by 5 turns by 2,000 each, not just, again, going to be something like 1,000. So it is still a flat damage added, but if you start thinking about multiple attacks, either in a solo environment or maybe just due to lucky carding, this could quickly add up to quite a bit of additional damage. It's just one of those deals where it's not going to be the hugest of increases, but it's better to have it than not. So again, he gets that standard upgrade. It really does help his overall damage output, especially in the face of units like, again, Hoku Saber and such, where, you know, they might be permanently available and free as of the Evocation Festival. I think that's why they kind of saw that writing on the wall. They realized the issue they were going to have with the Evocation Festival, and they kind of looped back in and said, all right, let's go ahead and give Lancelot that upgrade. So again, I do think it's just a great upgrade for him. Lancelot has never been a bad unit. I don't think he's ever been the most meta of units, but he's certainly been quality and a really fun unit to use. So this just allows him to kind of have that staying power down the stretch, as a lot of other units had sort of passed him in terms of raw damage output. And then last but not least, we get Bunion. Now, Bunion, again, is a welfare at this point. You will actually end up getting a rare prism from having Bunion all the way leveled up with the new anniversary milestones. But this is a certainly a useful unit. If you've never used Bunion before and you don't understand why people have and hold Bunion in high regard, the answer is simple. Bunion has the single fastest noble phantasm in the game. It is faster than Arash. It is faster than everybody else. It is quite literally just a stomping of her boot. That's it. And it is gone and done with very quickly. So while Bunion might not have had the best overall damage, Bunion was useful to a lot of people just for taking out an early wave as quick as possible. If you just wanted to rush through the node and get it done, Bunion was your girl, because she just absolutely would take out one of the waves in record time for you. The downside has always been that Bunion does not have charge, so you needed some way to either get Bunion to full or just start her out at full charge. But again, given the fact she is a welfare, and now because of the Mississippi Mythicizers event, you should have gotten her coins, you should also be able to kind of work on that append and maybe help that out a little bit. But they end up coming back and saying, you know what, while Bunion was obviously a decent unit, had that ability to maybe buff the party a little bit too, Bunion kind of had fallen behind, especially as a 1-star. So let's make sure that we actually keep her damage in line with where she would need to be in the current day and age. Which is nice that they've done this for Bunion, but unfortunately they haven't done this for every other sort of welfare berserker. So it is what it is, but I am going to say that at least Bunion got this NP upgrade, and it is just a standard upgrade. You can see it does nothing different than it did before. It just does it better. And basically at that point we had the 10% scaling of the defense down for 5 turns on the overcharge, and it instead becomes 20%. Otherwise, it is just a very simple upgrade. It's not meant to be anything flashy or like amazing, because again, she is a 1-star. But this certainly just helps overall usability. It's going to increase the amount of nodes that you can get away with using a Bunion in. And so that's just going to allow you to form even more sort of speed comps, even more early waves that she would be able to be used to kind of fly right through. So I do think this is a very solid upgrade for Bunion, even though it doesn't really, you know, change the game in any way, shape, or form. It's just something to help her kind of keep pace in the current year. So again, I do think this one's a very, very nice upgrade for her. And that's pretty much it for our round of strengthening. So you can kind of see what I mean when I say that these were not the most like crazy or robust ones. We have certainly over the years seen some incredible upgrades as of the anniversary strengthenings, but this year was not really any of those. I didn't really feel like any of these really sort of moved the meter that much. There was nothing truly game changing, just things that, again, helped out some of the units in need. And I do think part of the reason that these maybe seem a little bit lackluster as well to people is going to be the fact that there's just not a lot of 5 stars that actually got touched here. These are mostly focused on 4-star and lower, and in that regard, I can't say that these units didn't deserve it. Every single one of them needed an upgrade, so it is nice that they kind of actually did manage to hit these units. But just sort of to recap again, I certainly would have wished that they had actually managed to increase the amount that they do. Let's see, maybe this year on JP at its anniversary, if they do that, maybe they'll expand how many units are actually getting strengthenings, but we'll see. I just hope they actually do take that sort of stuff under advisement and actually do begin to kind of try to keep more of the roster up to date and in line with the current needs and demands of, again, 90 plus content and content in a post sort of LB7 ordeal call world. But again, let me know what you guys think. Which one was your favorite upgrade out of all of these? I will see you guys for the next one. Have a good one.